Did you ever have a plan that didn't work out? Well, I think many of us can relate to that. And today we're going to have a conversation with Deborah Horowitz. Deborah is a consultant and clinical training specialist and also a coach. She started out as a therapist, but she's not doing that today. So Deborah, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much, Lisa, for having me. I'm really excited about talking about these ideas around reinvention and how we got to where we are now.
Yes, exactly. So let's talk about becoming a therapist. You know, I know when I was young, when I was asked, what do you want to do when you grow up? You know, it was being a teacher or a nurse or at my time, one of the typical things female people were supposed to do. But I didn't really hear anyone say, I want to grow up to be a therapist. So tell us how you got there.
It's really interesting. It is the only thing I ever thought about growing up to be a therapist. I toyed with the idea of a hot minute of being an architect, but that was it. It was, I think, because people always came to me and told me their issues, talked with me as if I were an adult. I'm an only child, so I related to the world of adults much sooner. And I also saw all of the dysfunction. We all have families with dysfunction. And how do you navigate that? And so being a therapist was my way of sort of processing through that and also gaining some credibility and standing. And that's how I wound up there. It really was just a sort of natural, organic role for me.
Yeah, so as you came into that, there had to be some things that happened in your childhood that led you that way. Do you feel comfortable sharing that with us?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So my first cousin has severe obsessive compulsive disorder. He was diagnosed when he was very young, and he was hospitalized when he was very young. So I was 13 at the time. I had already been telling all of my family what I wanted to do. And my grandfather, who was my hero, said, you go to that hospital and you help him and you fix it, which is an awful lot of burden, one would think, on a 13-year-old.
Yes, what pressure.
But actually, it was more like, I believe in you and I believe you can do it and you can understand this. Don't be afraid. And that's how I took it. And so I went to that hospital and I spent many, many times visiting. And then all through his life, I've been his coach as he's gone through various programs. And now he's functioning quite independently, having a very nice life. But he still calls on me when he needs it. So that's just one example.
You know, that is so great because you were able to come into that part of him as a relative, but then being able to build that trust and creating that safe space that now you can serve as an anchor that he can bounce things off of. I love how that all worked out. All right.
Really?
So, yeah, go ahead.
No. It often amazes me when I look at him, that legacy that has come through. And
I think that is one thing as we do our work, we always think, okay, I'm putting this work out, but rarely do we see the impact on it. I know I started my career as a teacher and children would be in my class and then they would move on and you wouldn't really know what impact you might have had on their lives. But when they came back and would tell you, that was really rewarding. All right. So you're going along. You're a therapist.
I'm a therapist.
And how is that life going?
So in the beginning, it was great. I was still honing my craft. But then I got to the point where I realized that what mental health was doing and being a therapist was doing, particularly in the late 80s, early 90s, was about stabilization. It was about symptom management. There was something always going to be wrong, but you managed it. You got through it. You went back and forth. It really wasn't about well-being or healing or recovery. And you're mired in, as you were saying, this confluence of factors that are traumatizing us left, right, and center. And that's what was coming through the door. So people would get further than they were in their journey when they went through therapy, but then they plateaued. And where do we go next? And I
Right.
always wondered, is that all there is for this?
Right.
And then I
Right.
had a couple of experiences that turned that on its head.
So tell us about maybe one of those.
So one of these was I was working for the Department of Mental Health, and I was mired in this curriculum design around safety in the workplace and trauma-informed care and violence in particular. And I had been researching and writing and teaching and publishing on all of those things until one day my daughter came home from high school and she said, "Mom." And I said, "Hey, kid." She said, "I am president of the Kindness Club." And I said, "Say what?" And she said to me, "Yes. And every year we have this big event where we bring in speakers and we all talk about how kindness interacts." And of course, now she knows what I do for a living.
Right.
And they have no budget. So she says to me, "Mom, would you come in and speak to 1,600 high school students about the science of kindness?" Because at that point, she wanted to be a biochemist.
Okay. All right.
So,
Wow.
so I'm thinking, wow. But as I started to do the research, it occurred to me and I saw the antidotes for the fear, the anger, and the shame of trauma come through the lens of compassion, empathy, and pride.
Mm.
And so we have on-off switches. Our bodies are remarkable, and we can change one another's brain chemistry by the way we listen, by the way we talk with one another, the spaces we create together. And I went, aha, that's the piece that's missing.
There's so much I love about this, Deborah. One is the trajectory of our lives that really helps us discover our next step. What were the chances your daughter was the president of the Kindness Club? And what were the chances that she would ask you to speak? And making sure that you were able to connect those dots is just, it's serendipitous. But I also want to talk about when you were a therapist, what I heard a lot in that is addressing the symptoms, but not getting to the root of the issue. And you'll hear people speak about being in talk therapy for years and years and years and never being able to advance. All right. So how did the talk to 1,600 high school students go? I'm very curious because I know high school students really well. How did that go over?
It went beautifully. In fact, the science professor asked me to share with him the whole presentation because he wanted to use it years going forward.
Nice.
Which was absolutely fantastic. And the kids, I had them create art while I was speaking. Mm. What is the kindest thing you've ever done? What is the kindest thing you've ever heard? And we had those in the room have kindness badges that their goal was to go out and do an act of kindness and give their student their badge. So they all went around. It was just an amazing amount of energy. And I realized that just as violence is contagious, so is kindness and hope and positivity. And so when we talk about symptom management in therapy, if you don't have that other frame of reference going, if you don't have that lens of there's recovery, true recovery, then you and your therapist are going to think, well, you're stable, you're okay, it should be fine. Mm-hmm. And it was just unfulfilling and I watched it be unfulfilling for my clients. Is this all there is?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because they come to you full of hope that they cannot feel this way any longer. And what I also hear in that too, Deborah, is telling them that each of us have light within us. And I talked about this in the last episodes. We each come into this world with this light. And when we can shine it on darkness, it just raises everything for everyone in our world. And we need that so much. So I hear a reinvention story coming. So you were a therapist, got into this situation, you had this big aha moment. What happened next?
So then I was working then to incorporate this part of safety into the curriculum. And I came across this book called Conversational Intelligence by Judith Glaser. And it was phenomenal. It was all about the neurobiology of building trust in relationships and having credibility with one another, and not just conflict management, but the co-creation and innovation necessary. And I was so struck by the book that I picked up the phone and I called the author. My friends all around are going, "You called the author?" I'm like, "Yeah, I called the author." And she was delightful. Unfortunately, she was dying from cancer at that point. But we connected so well that she handed me over to her protege, who happens to be Elix Cintron, who I then brought in to DMH to do this coaching piece, co-facilitating with teams that had been stuck in the mud, that were completely toxic, that didn't trust one another. And he and I turned it all around with the coaching and the potential. And he is still my mentor. He's still involved. And it's just amazing to see that people regaining their sense of purpose, regaining their sense of self-efficacy, their ability to give discretionary effort, all of that changes when you move beyond the paradigm of what's wrong with you to what's strong in you.
What's wrong in you to what's strong in you. Oh, I'm going to take that one with me. I definitely will. And I think it is. It's so much about our perspective and what we choose to believe and where we are moving towards versus where we get stuck in ourselves.
Absolutely.
So you are on this path of reinvention. I also can sense there is this passion behind it, Deborah. So tell us, what is it that you're doing when you're working in your zone of genius?
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. So I've always known that I had sort of an affinity for language and writing, but my zone of genius is actually that of a language architect. And it is of my purpose is potential. So I really help others get clarity through precise language, through vision, so that they can then achieve their potential, which is just fascinating. In fact, the word abracadabra actually in Aramaic means I speak what I create, or wow. I create what I speak. So that is a way in which we manifest ourselves in the world. And so bringing that potential, bringing that clarity of language and ideas to the table, that's not work for me. Nice. I can write and edit at the same time and be totally in the zone, whereas I know others really struggle. So that for me is what is amazing. When people can articulate and spell it out, what they want, and get clarity on conversations they're having with themselves in their head that are negative, or they're writing journaling and they're like, oh, that's it. Those are the experiences that tap into potential. And that really matters for me. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Well, I can sense that excitement in there, Deborah. And this, I believe, is one of the reasons you and I connected. I love helping people realize that the lives they're living now is not all that there is, and they don't have to settle for that. So I'd like to shift a little bit to go into this deeper. And can you tell me, what is it that breaks your heart?
What breaks my heart is people who have tremendous amounts of potential and skills and talent that are never given the opportunity to shine. When we are surrounded by, as we were talking earlier, all of the negativity, all of the climate anxiety, the political climate, the things around oppression, all of those things that are weighing on us are filters which dim our light. And so that's important for me to help people get clarity on that.
Yeah. And so what you're referencing is 2 episodes ago, I talked about the polycrisis, all this disruption that we're seeing in the world. So if you're listening to this and you've not heard that, I suggest you go back and take a listen to that, where I really unpack all of this shaky ground that we're on is causing people to look up and say, what am I doing with my life? Mm-hmm. So when we look at this, that breaks your heart, Deborah, What is the big problem you see that you're trying to solve?
The big problem I see that I'm trying to solve is to reconnect people with their identities and with each other. We've got so much information coming at us that what is happening is people are simply freezing in place. It's like the deer in headlights. Who am I? What am I doing? Where am I going? Does this still matter to me? Does this not? And so to sort of shine a light so people can find their path again is what I think my purpose is here. And whether that's individual life coaching or it's teams, organizations, and strategic plans, it's the same idea that it is people that make the world go round.
Mm-hmm. So you referenced your work. You work one-on-one with people and then also with corporate. Tell us a little bit more about what you do.
So I am now a coach. I'm also the CEO of my own company, Sunstone Evolutionary Coaching and Consulting. And it does three things. One, it does the coaching piece where we build in and the goals and the potential and moving forward from where you are. But we also do the consulting where we'll look at your processes, your protocols, your workflows to see whether or not they're in line with your values. Mm-hmm. And then we also provide the training so that if there's something that's missing, then we help co-create with you to fill that gap. And all of that is so that the people who are on the receiving end own what they have at the end and that it is sustainable. Many of us have gone through consultants who came in, dropped a whole bunch of ideas on there, said, do this, and then left. We're not that.
Right. Well, that is refreshing. And I could see how this type of work would really, when you talk about bringing your employees into the mix on this, it could really work. Right now, our world is in a situation where we're trying to create these cultures where people want to work, where we're trying to engage employees. And when you come in with a program and system and voluntold or voluntel people to do it, right? There's just a lot of pushback in it. And so when you're able to bring them into the fold, so to speak, I can see a lot of value in that. So, there was one thing in your, and I do want to let everybody know how I met Deborah, is another one of those LinkedIn connections. I think I had been posting something and she saw something in one of my posts that resonated with her and reached out and we had a conversation, and we'll talk a little bit about where that went in a moment. But one thing you said was we often function within a habitual paradigms that lead to living our life on autopilot. Can you speak a little bit to that about what are we doing?
So many of us, right, just to get through the day, go through routines, put one foot in front of the other, but we don't reach a state of joy. We barely reach a state of contentment. And so we're doing that just because that's all the energy we can muster. Mm-hmm. And because we have so much information coming at us that we can't think critically about a lot of it. So part of this is we get into this phase of routines that don't really take us anywhere, right? And what we really are looking for is the skills to divide, and send off these pieces about intention. Mm-hmm. Right? That being mindful about the choices and the information is what can propel you forward and sort of get out of that, for lack of a better phrase, zombie apocalypse mentality that I see a lot of people walking around. Is I encourage people to think, not only to think, but to use their voices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see where that would be a great value, is to speak that out into the world. But I think a lot of people are full of fear about doing that and how to do that and the repercussions of doing that. But, I think I'm hearing more and more conversations, even today, of what I'm seeing on LinkedIn today, people talking about having the courage to try something different, to get uncomfortable, because that's when we grow. Do you see a hesitation in your work, Deborah? Or let me just phrase it this way. Where do you see the biggest hesitation in your work of people who are hesitant to change? What is holding them back?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that are holding them back. One are very real practicalities, right? If I lose this job in the market we're in, how am I going to feed my family? Mm-hmm. That's one very real thing. But there are other things about, I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing and offend somebody. Mm-hmm. I'm afraid I'm going to do something that's going to get me or my employer sued. Right?
Valid.
I'm afraid, I'm afraid that I won't be able to repair a rift with my coworker if we have this conversation. And so part of the skill building is creating an environment of psychological safety that has integrity so that you can have those tough conversations and get somewhere with them, that they're not a cutoff, they're not a blow up, that they become just another piece of information in the narrative.
Yes. I think that's really good. And, I think the other thing that I have come to learn is there is no greater power than that of self-awareness. Being aware of who you are and how you may be perceived by others and the impact of the things you say that send a ripple way beyond than what you can imagine. There's a lot of value in that.
Actually, I have an exercise for people to do at the end of the day. And it's one way to continue to build self-awareness. And so part of it is to ask myself, have I been angry today? And if I've been angry, then what am I afraid of? Because behind all anger is fear. Afraid of loss of autonomy, loss of financial, loss of social status, whatever it is. And then there's a piece about asking yourself, was there conflict today? What was my part in that? What was somebody else's part in that? And did I do something today to make me feel proud? If I've done something today that I wouldn't want anybody to know about, then I'm not in a place of being able to harness my potential. And so asking those simple questions at the end of the day, you can either journal them out or you can simply say them in your head, helps process all of the levels of awareness of you, self, and other in context.
That's exciting to have those questions because I think a lot of times, particularly if we've had a frantic day, we get to the end of the day, we lay our head on the pillow, and when we go to sleep, we leave all of that for our subconscious to work out. And that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
Oh, yes, it is.
But if we could get that out of our head on paper, and I find when I put things out and I can see them visually, first of all, being aware of what they are and calling them out takes away a lot of their power. And second, seeing it visually, it's not as big and scary as what it could be if it stays in your head.
Absolutely. And I will say that having gone through the positive intelligence piece with you, that absolutely happened. That even I was, who I think I'm relatively self-aware, came away with, oh my goodness, this is what I'm telling myself and I don't even realize it. And it's not serving me.
All right.
And so
yes. And that was so funny. So what Deborah is talking about is, Deborah, you're talking about the Mental Fitness Advantage program that I offer. It's a 7-week program and it helps you see where you're getting in your way. And Deborah, with your background as, doing what you do in your awareness and just expertise in the area of how the mind works, watching you go through this program was probably one of the most exciting things as I work through with people with it. I'm thinking watching this professional go through this program and have these ahas just confirms to me the power of it. It was really powerful for me when I went through it first, but as I go through the program with people in the cohort, and that is one thing that I think you really appreciated is I didn't tell you what to do, is just walking through it with you. So talk a little bit more about kind of what were some of your big ahas in this program?
My big ha-ha moments were, what is my saboteur in my head doing? And to find out that my biggest saboteur was being over logical or highly rational, to the detriment of some other really good parts of understanding and knowing, helped me get a handle on how I was communicating to others and the expectations I was having of others, because I held these for myself.
Yes. Yes.
That was incredibly powerful. And also to see you, Lisa, as you said, not just tell me this is a good thing, but you did it with us and shared the experience. And that idea about getting into the arena together, putting on the hip boots together, that's how sustainable change happens. It doesn't happen with one person in an arena and everybody just watching doing nothing. It's get in there, put your hip boots on, and see what happens when you do. And that really was powerful.
Well, I really appreciate that. But another reason I do that is because this mental fitness is not a one and done. This is a tool you can use for the rest of your life. And when we talk about mental fitness, it's not unlike physical fitness. If you're going to get in physical shape, you make a commitment, you come up with a training plan, and let's say you go to the gym, right? But watching someone work out in the gym is not going to build your muscles. You have to get in there and do the work. And once you start that work, it's just like your physical muscles. When you stop training, the muscles go away. So it is really important to me to model that to the people in the program. This is not 7 weeks that you learn and your mind is completely clear and you've got control over everything for the rest of your life. It is giving you the tool that you can then use to become aware. And Deborah, I have to ask you, so this overanalyzing, this hyper rational that you became aware of, had you seen it before? Because again, you're very self-aware. Had you seen it before, or what made it come to light?
So I'd seen that I'd been hyper rational before, but I always saw it as a positive. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is great. I seek until I find, and if my pet peeve is I hate not knowing and all of these things. But what I didn't realize is that by sticking to that so fiercely, I wasn't communicating in a way that others could hear me or that I could hear somebody else's language. And I would be very quick to judge if I didn't hear the facts, the data, the pieces, the plan, that this is not worthy, right? So it was not only a detriment to myself, but to everybody else around me as I'm passing judgment. So that was really key.
So tell me a little bit, did your team members notice a difference in you?
They did. They did right away, because I would pause more and I would talk less and I would invite different kinds of information. And I would go into meetings doing these repetitions so that I was already at a baseline and I wasn't already hijacked thinking about something else.
Yes, it is
powerful.
Yeah, it is a powerful tool that will help ground you when you get ready for some big situations, big conversations. It helps increase your performance, lowers your stress, and really creates better relationships. So, Deborah, I want to ask you, we had talked previously about the idea of reinvention and so many people reinventing themselves. And you had mentioned something about the difference between your age and the age of your parent and how that might influence how you saw the world.
I think really it did. So my mother was a boomer. And I, of course, I think it's Generation X. I can't even remember what generation I am, actually. But my mother was very much about plodding through, doing what you needed to do. You didn't talk about emotions. You didn't look for validation. all of these things, hence why I needed to be a therapist to sort of decode all of that and what it really meant. But as I was coming up, there were more opportunities for me to learn from others than my parents had.
Mm-hmm.
And that piece is important because instilled in me from my grandparents was this need to have lifelong learning. There was never oh, you're done. You can stop learning. There was always that growing. Somehow it missed my mother in that regard. And that piece alone made me different from my mother and that generation. And so I sort of look at myself as the bridge generation now between the Zers and the millennials and that generation as well. My mother's. And that's where I find the power of connection to be at its peak, to be able to relate and communicate across all of that.
Yeah. And if we look right now, there's either 4 or 5 generations in the workplace. The boomers that are still there all the way down. And we came up with very different situations on access to information, on how we even communicate with each other. I'll never forget is after so I've got 2 grown children, and after they were away, and I remember one time I called one of them and the response was, "What's wrong?" He said, "Nothing's wrong. I just want to have a conversation." But for them, much of their communication within their world is by text. And if you talk, that elevates the urgency, or something has to be wrong. So yeah. And we're, in my world, it was nothing to pick up the phone. I don't pick it up as much anymore, but you see that.
Well, and you also see it too. It was nothing in our generation to be in the workforce and walk into somebody's office because the door was open and just say, hey, to have those water cooler moments. Now information has to be transactional in a way. What do you want? What do you need? How fast is that? And less about who you're contacting and for the purpose of things. And so I'd like us to sort of expand that utilitarian language back to the richness of the language that really brings us forward.
Yes. Yes. There's a lot of great opportunity for understanding people who may be different than us by being open to be curious.
Absolutely.
And I think, so much of our world has come to a place of, if you're not exactly like me, you must be wrong. And again, a lot of that is based on fear. We're not equipped to handle some of those conversations because we've not practiced it. And it sounds like that's what you're able to help people do.
That's exactly it. Anytime we are faced with a social situation that is uncertain or ambiguous, our reptilian brains immediately code that as a threat, which was very helpful when we were on the savannah. Not so much now. So being mindful and being able to calm that part of your brain makes the thinking part, the problem solving, the creativity more online and in tune.
So Deborah, for people that are feeling the urge that they've got to a place and they want something new, they are looking at a possible, adding a skill, or looking to even move to a different career, maybe leaving corporate to go out on their own or developing a side gig. What is behind that's driving this urge, and what advice would you give them?
I think what's behind driving this urge is that whatever they're doing isn't in line with what they value. And that getting clear on what you value and then making your decisions through the lens of your values puts you on a path and a trajectory where you want to go. So if you're in a workplace and the workplace has values that are very antithetical to your own, there's friction. There's distrust, there's highlight for burnout. So my first thought to everybody is, if you're thinking about reinventing yourself, go back and write down what matters to you. What are your values? And there are a number of tools out there online that you can use to kind of sort through your values. But once you do that, the path opens up. So for me, it was like my values were integrity and trust and collaboration and a few others. And I wound up with Sunstone Evolutionary Coaching and Consulting, which has 12 ensemble members. And I say ensemble, not team, because team is everybody just sticks to the role. Ensemble. And we make beautiful collaborative music together. And they have skills I don't have, and they communicate with one another. And they're really a group that relies on each other, not just for whatever the work is, but as people with like minds, even if we have different ways to communicate. And we have an extremely diverse group, age-wise, race, gender, sexual orientation. And it works because, as you were saying, the openness, the willingness to even go there is more than half the battle.
Yes. And I can see in situations where our companies are open to this type of inclusion, that as long as everybody is rowing the same direction towards a vision they all believe in, how you get there is when you can bring in that creativity and that diversity of our skills and our gifts that we've been just so fortunate to have. And tying it into who you really are, I think that's when we feel in alignment. So, Deborah, if you were to go back and give advice to your younger self, what would you tell yourself today?
I would probably tell myself to think a little more broadly and to see where my skills could also make a difference, not just as a therapist. I think I would say, think more broadly. Think about what it is that your purpose is to be here, to uplift others, to bring people together. And that might have changed what I was doing, but I don't think it would have changed who I am at the core.
Yes. No, I agree. I think what we're finding with people who are looking to reinvent themselves, they are really looking for that return home to themselves of who they really were before they got covered up with all of these other opinions from people telling them what they should be, right? So, exactly. Deborah, if someone would like to work with you or reach out to you, what's the best way to contact you?
So they can reach me via LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn profile. I also have an email address, sphinxddh@yahoo.com. Yes, there's a story behind that. If you contact me, I'll tell you the story. And we also have a website, sunstone-coaching.com, where you can see more about me and more about our work and the ensemble.
All right. Wonderful. And I love that you have an ensemble. Well, Deborah, thank you so much for being with us today and providing your wisdom and insights. And for those of you that are considering reinventing yourself, you're on that journey, use some of those tips that Deborah talked about. You're also welcome to inquire about the Mental Fitness Advantage program. I have a 7-week program. I offer it several times a year. It is one of the top 3 things that changed my life. And I know Deborah had a great experience with it too. So Deborah, thank you so much.
Thank you.